Hey, you've tuned in to the GFree and Happy Show. Tonight, we're talking beer. I have got the CEO of Craft Brew Alliance, Terry Michaelson, as my guest tonight, and we're talking all about Omission beer. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome to the GFree and Happy Show that happens every Monday night at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern. I'm your host, Kathy, and I've been gluten-free for 4 years and counting. So there's been a lot of talk about this beer. Let me make sure I get this because I have to turn it just right. This beer right there, Omission beer. Last summer, August 2nd, there was a big FDA gluten-free label ruling, and all of a sudden I saw Omission beer, confusion about Omission beer. Well, I'm a consumer of Omission beer because I am in the Northwest, and I go down 5 minutes to my store, and this is the beer I find. I find it over any other gluten-free beer. So this is what I've been enjoying for at least a year or more. My family's enjoyed it too. So when I heard how it was made recently, I thought, I need to have somebody from Omission on my GFree and Happy Show so he can explain, and Terry was very happy to do it, explain how the process that they do to make this gluten-free. It's amazing. I don't know if you've looked at omission.com. Great website full of info. I know there's a lot of controversy around this, and Terry is here to talk all about Omission beer. But first, episode 39 of the GFree and Happy Show is brought to you by Oval Eye TV. Oval Eye TV believes in building community through shared experiences. We produce professional live webcasts that bring tribes together. Visit Oval Eye TV today. Another thing, I don't know, it can't be called gluten-free, but I love, if you can see behind me, I've got my cartons of beer here. Crafted to remove gluten, says on the packaging. And it's all, their branding's really nicely done too. And so by the way, if you have any questions for Terry, please chat, and I will field them in tonight. But let's get Terry on and start asking him questions. Hi, Terry.
Hi, how are you?
Very good. So happy to have you on tonight because, like I said, I'm a consumer of your beer. I'm gluten-free. I would hate to be glutened. I have good news, everybody. I've never been glutened by this beer. I'm drinking it now as we talk, and excuse me if I spill. So let's talk to you, Terry. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was diagnosed with celiac disease 12 years ago. And when I was originally diagnosed, quite frankly, there just weren't a lot of options. And in fact, I remember when I was diagnosed, my wife sitting and talking to me and saying, how are we going to figure this out? Because at that time, to find a lot of gluten-free products had to go to small specialty shops where they had some foods. Unfortunately, at that point, a lot of them just weren't that good. Some of them tasted a little bit like cardboard. So for me, it's been really encouraging how much things have progressed over the last, especially over the last decade. But the last 4 or 5 years, the options that are available for beverages and food in restaurants and in grocery stores have just made the quality of life a lot better. So being a CEO of a beer company and having worked there when I was diagnosed, and then after that not being able to drink the beer was frustrating. So finding a way to get a beer that matched my expectations and our brewers' expectations, and that I felt really good about it being a beer that was right for a gluten-free consumer has been really rewarding.
And your brewmaster actually has a wife that's gluten-free too, isn't she?
That's exactly right. When she had one of her children, right after that, she found out that she was celiac, and it was at that time that he really started exploring developing a gluten-free beer, and we explored utilizing some of the alternative grains, some of the things like sorghum that other brewers have used, and we produced a beer that was gluten-free. It just didn't quite meet our standards of what we were looking for in terms of taste, similarity to what people in this country are used to for beer. And so it's been a long process finding our way to Omission.
Well, and it's interesting being, I've met a lot of people through this show and social media and how they got to be celiac, gluten-free, whatever. But I've never met somebody that was actually like the head of a beer company that was celiac, and they couldn't taste their own beer. That would be so frustrating, and I could understand why you'd want to do this. Now, I want to go through this process because when the controversy came out, I had no idea. I took the word from, I don't know, one of my store clerks that's saying this is gluten-free. And I want to ask you too, did it say, I guess it says right there, has it always said, Omission, this top part crafted to remove the gluten right here? Or has it said gluten-free?
Well, we've kind of evolved. It's been interesting because the labeling laws are a little bit unique in this country. So where we brew in Oregon, actually we've been allowed to say gluten-free, and the Oregon labels aren't directed by the TTB, which directs the rest of the country outside of where we brew. So we kind of have a unique rules. So in Oregon, it's gluten-free. We sell it in Canada and we sell it in Europe, and it's gluten-free there. So actually, this process and this kind of beer has been selling in Europe for over 5 or 6 years and has met kind of the international standards of being under 20 parts per million. So we're in a little bit of a unique position where the science and the laws are evolving in this country. So you're right, outside of Oregon, we have not been able to call it gluten-free because the TTB had been waiting for the FDA ruling, and now we're waiting for the TTB to use that guidance to come up with their final labeling direction.
It's funny how everybody has their own, like the TTB now has their own, labeling system too, compared to the products, the food we intake. It's been a very interesting journey to read about your story too. Okay, so the controversy of all of this stuff has taken place around the way you make your beer. So why don't you tell us a little bit now about how this is amazing to me. I had no idea how this is made.
Okay. Well, yeah, it is interesting because the rest of the world for a long time has kind of been comfortable with where science is in gluten-free being under 20 parts per million. So that had been out there for a while, and we became aware of this process. Actually, Joe Casey, our brewmaster, became aware of this process and brought it to me probably 3 or 4 years ago. And so we decided to work on this and explore whether we could make a beer that met our standards and was still gluten-free. So the thing that makes this unique is we do start with barley, which obviously has gluten.
Hello. Yeah, right there. It starts with gluten.
It starts with gluten. So, and that we understood from the start would make people uncomfortable, because it certainly makes me uncomfortable. I mean, being a celiac for 12 years, you're taught to stay away from all those kinds of ingredients. Obviously, Joe's wife obviously is very careful to stay away from those. As we started looking at the process, and Joe started looking at the process, we started being aware of how the science had evolved, what people had done in Europe for years, and how celiacs had been drinking it in Europe. We also became aware of some validation studies that were being done. So the key to this for us is the process of us making certain that how we're brewing it, that we're taking out the proteins, which gluten's a protein, as we go along, that we use an enzyme as a part of the process. And at the end of the day, what happens is the gluten is removed. What's equally important to us, and what really became kind of the foundation of this, was the transparency of sharing that information with the consumer. One, we wanted them to know that it started with grains that included gluten. We wanted them to know that we removed the gluten, and we wanted them to know that every batch was tested, and it was tested internally and externally, and that in that process, we also wanted to have a different level of transparency. So we share that information with our consumers. So on every carton, you can look at the code date, and you can get online and you can see what the gluten level is in our product.
Okay, let's hold right there, because actually I found that out today. It's transparency all over your website, by the way. Let's get that on there. So there is a date.
That's right.
Each bottle. Also, hold on, I'm going to find that date. Of course, now when I'm doing this, I can't find the date. But there's a date on every single bottle. It's all wet, that's why. Yeah. And you can go and look at this date, plug it in to their website, and it'll say the parts per million of what that bottle had in the gluten content, which I did today, because actually I've had 2 beers today, one when I researched, and then one tonight, because when you're talking beer, you have to. So I did that actually, and it was way below 20. But I like that you do that for the consumers. I didn't know that either until I read through your website. So thank you for sharing that. So keep going about the process.
So that's the key is for us is going all the way through, and for us being assured at the end of that what we're sending out has less than 20 parts per million. And because this is a product that starts with a grain that includes gluten, and it is new and the science is evolving, we felt that it was really important for us to be transparent. It was extremely important to me. It was important to Joe. So it's something that we started that we believed was important to us. But what we found is how much the gluten-free consumer appreciates that transparency, because as far as we know, we're the only gluten-free product out there that actually provides that level of transparency, that tests every batch that goes out. And so we're excited about this. The new FDA ruling is now established 20 parts per million is gluten-free, which aligns the U.S. with the rest of the world, which is where the rest of the world's been for some time. And there have been 2 recent validation studies, one from a global cereal chemist society and one from the American brewing chemists that validate the testing methodology that we use. So we're really excited about how the science is involved and where it puts us. And what's rewarding to me is just how many consumers have personally written to us as I've been at events, come up to me and talked about how much this has added to their quality of life, because now they can have a beer and experience that like their friends.
And it's not, you went through the process, but you also on the website, and there's articles. And let me tell you, I've read every blog out there. I've read every article. I read through your whole website before this show because I wanted to know what was going on. But one of the things I thought was interesting is this is really painstaking for you guys. I mean, you have to... It's like you do the test, which is an R5 test.
R5 ELISA.
Which I'm finding out all about testing now, too. Right. But you have those bottles sit there until they get tested and you get the results back.
You're exactly right.
And you don't send out bottles until they've been approved, and then you send them out. And the approval has to be way under 20 parts per million. Which
that's right.
Oh, go ahead.
And it's a little bit interesting because actually most of our results, well over 90% come back that it's non-detectable. In other words, it may not have any gluten in it at all. The R5 ELISA really only verifies that below 10 parts per million that there's a validity with the testing. So when it comes back non-detectable, it may not have any gluten in it at all, but it's well below the 20 parts per million.
And that this 20 parts per million are very interesting things. Everything that we consume in the gluten-free community has to be under 20, and not everybody gives this much information about testing. I had Mina on the Mina gluten-free baking mix. She was on, and she told me exactly what her count was. It was 5%,
Right.
which is very nice to hear, but I've never really asked anybody about this and found out so much. You really painstaking take the time to educate your consumers, because it's a weird thing. I mean, we're actually having beer, and it probably makes it taste better is what I'm thinking, right? That starts with the regular kind of beer.
Well, it does. It gives you the kind of beer flavor that you're used to having with traditional beer. So it's a different flavor than you obviously get with alternative grains. But what ends up happening is it tastes exactly like other beers that you'd have that had gluten in them. It's just that we've removed it. So you get all the flavors of those grains without the gluten.
And I have a question from Kirsten Berman. She's the glutenfreegal.com, and she's wondering how you felt about, by your own admission, any gluten ingestion is bad. Yet as a fellow celiac, you have chosen to make your beer with an ingredient that is knowingly not gluten-free.
Well, that's interesting. The article that came out of spent a long time talking to the reporter about that, and the actual language that I used is that any gluten over the 20 parts per million could be dangerous to the celiac, and that's why it's so important for there to be testing. So I think it was unfortunate that it came out the way that it did. The interesting thing to me is we provided that reporter with all the validation studies that were also done, and he chose not to include those validation studies, but included a comment from a scientist that had some concerns about potentially fragments being left behind in the beer. So I think it was unfortunate that it was taken out of context. So in fact, I didn't say that any gluten was dangerous. And as you said, the interesting fallacy, I think, is that people assume when products had said gluten-free is they didn't have any gluten in it at all. But as you just commented with the package that you have, there's 5 parts per million in that, and that most products that we consume have some gluten, either from cross-contamination or something. So it's important that we pay attention to science and where the science is, which is there's been a lot of research, and the worldwide standards have been set at 20 parts per million.
The worldwide, really not the U.S. set that. Somebody in Europe probably set that.
It's been set in Europe for quite a few years. As you probably know, celiac disease is really kind of a northern European disease. So they've been advanced further than we have in evaluating and looking at the science.
Well, it's interesting. This is very controversial because you start with gluten, and I had tried this for at least a year, so I know the flavor. I know it never gluten me and I'm in the healing process too, and I would hate for anything to happen to what's going on in my body now. So I don't know. Hearing all of the stuff going on, if I would try your beer with all, like that reporter, he didn't put in all the information. So
Right.
That's why I have you on here today too, because I want people to be educated about what they're consuming or not yet, and try, oh no, I'm never going to try it. But it's up to the consumer and what they want to do. But actually, like I said, it's very good, very tasty, and I've never been glutened. I didn't know the process either before I tried this.
Well, I really appreciate that. And from our perspective, our feeling is that if there's transparency there and we provide the information, anybody that's not comfortable with that, and being celiac, I understand that, shouldn't drink it. And when you're a celiac, you're making choices with that all the time. What we're proud of is the transparency we provide. And what's important to us is that we're a part of hopefully helping evolve the science and bring more information, because I think what that does is provide celiacs with more options, and more options provide, I think, a chance that they're going to lead a healthier lifestyle. So from our standpoint, we want people to pay attention to the science and make certain that they're current and that they're making their decisions based on what's accurately out there, and maybe not assumptions that weren't exactly scientifically validated that are years old.
Well, and it's very interesting. You gave a bunch of stuff. Go to omission.com. It's got a video of him and the brewmaster too, but you have the and we put it on here a couple times. Each time, you have sample tests of what you've done. And like I said, you can just key in the date of the carton of beer you have, or it was on my beer label. I think I wiped it off by mistake. If you key in the date of the website, omission.com, you could see exactly how much gluten you're drinking. But another thing I want to talk to you about before we go is the labeling. Now, this came out August 2nd.
Right.
Now, I can't remember if you actually had, like you said, Oregon, you had gluten-free on here.
Right.
But Washington, has it always been this way with the gluten, crafted to remove gluten?
It's been very similar. As we worked with the TTB, the language evolved a little bit, but the language basically has always said something like that. And the TTB was waiting for the FDA to make their ruling, because once the FDA make their ruling, that kind of puts out the guidance. For instance, and what was important to us is that the aligning with the 20 parts per million where the rest of the world was, then set and provided some guidelines for the TTB to rule. The publication of the validation studies that have come out have only happened in the last year. So this is evolving quickly, but we're excited now because there really is a lot of information available now for the consumer to understand the 20 parts per million, but also understand the validation process.
And I really like that, because I'm learning a lot recently too of this kind of information about each product that I'm consuming. We have a question: do any other products other than beer use a process like yours to remove gluten? Do any American beers use this process today besides you?
There's some small brewers that do. Actually, there's some other brewers that haven't been in distribution quite as wide as us. And then there are some products like soy sauces that have done some of these. So there are some soy sauces that have used this process.
Thank you for sharing that. I've had Omission beer too at the Mariners game. Are you just like big time in the Northwest? I mean, I get Omission beer everywhere I go.
Well, it's interesting. We really are in the Northwest, but it's also growing rapidly in the East. In fact, our second largest market is the Washington, D.C. market. So it's interesting. The word of mouth travels quickly, and people sharing this, gluten-free consumers sharing this with friends. This is very personal for me, because obviously I love beer. But being celiac for 12 years, being healthy and eating the right way and consuming the right kinds of beverages are important to me. And I've shared it with lots of friends. And as I said, it's been really, really rewarding how much this has meant to the celiac consumer and the gluten-free consumer. So it's been great. It's been a great experience.
It's nice to hear. Real fast, let's see. How has the FDA labeling affected Omission beer too? I mean, has it done any damage for consumers, buying? Because I actually saw another thing, just as I tuned in tonight, saying like Omission beer is gaining. But tell me a little bit about how the FDA ruling has affected Omission beer.
It really hasn't done a lot at this point. The biggest thing is really establishing that 20 parts per million, because as I said, there were a lot of people out there, and you hear it all the time, that says gluten-free means absolutely no gluten, when in fact there are very few products that have absolutely no gluten. You certainly can get raw vegetables and things that aren't packaged that you can have more certainty with. But there are just a lot of products that have some, and that the science evaluation and the studies that have the 20 parts per million set has helped people really understand and get comfortable with that in the U.S. As I said, in Europe and Canada, that's been established for a while. The actual labeling regulations are set by the TTB, so we have to wait for them now to utilize the FDA guidelines to actually set that labeling. So it's a kind of a long process.
So you're kind of in limbo right now. And
We are. We certainly have conversations with the TTB, and they've been very good about having dialogue with us. We've sent them a lot of scientific research that's occurred. So right now, in the U.S. actually is where there's the most confusion, because as I said, in Europe and Canada, we're selling as gluten-free, and it's something that's basically been established there for some time.
Interesting. I didn't know that either. So what do you see the future in gluten-free beers? For still, I mean, I can buy a gluten-free beer at the Mariners game, but I can't order a gluten-free beer at a restaurant still with my burger and fries. And that's when you really want it too. So do you see a future of us ordering soon?
Yeah, I think so. We actually are in lots of restaurants and pubs, but it's still very much in the infancy. So when you look at how fast we're growing, I think it'll be fast. One of the things you can also do on the same website, omissionbeer.com, that you saw the test scores, is you can look on, and there's actually an Omission beer finder. And you can get on and put in your address, and whether you're looking for grocery stores
Actually,
or restaurants.
I did do that. Yeah.
And that will allow you to find where they are, because there actually are a number of restaurants that are carrying it at this point.
Well, and it's funny, if you, I'm showing the website now, it's got all sorts of information here, test results, FAQ, find Omission. So let's look for find Omission. And on my Mac computer, see, I'm not on a Mac. Oh, good. They do have a map here. And it says looking for it, though this is not Washington. Hold on. Let me just check. 98009. See? Finding nearest locations. Oh, there's one. Actually, there's more. That's wrong. That's wrong. I'm sorry, Terry. That's wrong.
See, we've got to be quicker on updating it. We're selling beer faster than technology.
Yeah, there's one in Duval where I live. So
that's right.
And I just bought 2 of them, as you can see. I consume quite a bit too.
That's good.
All right. So where can we find you besides omissionbeer.com? You're on Facebook.
We are.
Omission Beer.
Right.
You're on Twitter.
Yes.
Omission Beer. Do you have any events coming up?
We're running events all the time. There's not one big event at this point that's coming up, but one of the things that we're doing a lot of is we're dropping into different cities where there's been a lot of interest, and when we do that, we try to connect with the gluten-free community and have conversations with them about it, have events. So you can find those on our website and Facebook. They're continually coming up, and we're actually planning a number of those. One of the awareness months now, as you're probably aware of, is October. May was kind of the official one, and now October's been added. So during that month, we'll be having a number of different things where we're reaching out and interacting with the gluten-free community.
Well, and there's Oktoberfest. Hello. Lots of
That's
beer
right.
being consumed then. And if you're in my area, Seattle, Duval, Redmond area, Microsoft, hello, look me up because I want to be there.
We'll certainly do that.
So thank you so much, Terry. You've been a huge help for me because, for one thing, right away you guys said yes, which not everybody does right away. So I want to thank you for that too. Thanks again for being on the show. And everybody, there's no reason why you can't try it or have a loved one try it because it's really good. Omission beer. Thanks again, Terry.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about Omission beer and talk about the science of gluten-free.
I like that science. I'm getting into it.
Great. Thanks.
Okay, so that was Terry. That was fun. I love talking beer. So next week, after this beer fun, we're talking sugar cleanse. I'm going to need it. With Jennifer Fugo and Heather Kenzie. So that's going to be a fun one, full of information for all of us. Until next week, check out gfreeandhappy.com and then have a great GFree and Happy week.